Chapter 5. Dawn felt bad getting Aunt Cynthia to watch the boys. It was difficult working on the manuscript with Connor and Jordan running around the house, making so much noise. And Dawn really needed to finish his novel. There were times when he felt guilty about profiting off his tragic life story, though fictionalizing it helped a little. Giving the first book a happy ending seemed like therapy for him. The way things should have gone. Dawn liked writing, no matter how difficult it proved to be at times. He was 50,000 words in, having tapped into a creative well that allowed him to write without much interruption. Having the boys around had proven a hindrance, but Cynthia had taken care of that. Dawn hoped Connor didn't do anything unusual while under her watch. More than that, though, he hoped the boy didn't hurt the other children. Connor had killed a grown man. There was no telling what he could do to someone his size. Dawn suddenly stopped typing when he realized he'd written down the very thoughts he'd just said. The boy had killed a grown man, the page read. There was no telling what he could do to someone his size. The story wasn't even about the boys. It was about the brothers from the first book, and they didn't have children. Dawn scrolled through the manuscript to see if he'd mentioned any kids before now. He had. 2 boys, Casey and Trevor, were featured in at least 50 pages. Dawn found their rough introduction, laughing at himself for his lack of subtlety. The boys had just appeared out of nowhere. Dawn quickly read those 50 pages and found that the story had taken on an intriguing life of its own. He went to work, polishing the rough edges. This had become an entirely different story. An hour later, he got a call from a hysterical Cynthia about an incident that had just occurred at her house. Dawn rushed right over. When he got there, he found her in her living room with 4 kids, one of them Jordan. Connor was not among them. "What happened?" Dawn asked, slightly out of breath from all the stairs he'd just climbed. Cynthia took him to the kitchen and said quietly, "Connor got into my liquor stash downstairs." "Is he all right?" he asked. She nodded. "He tried to give some vodka to the other kids, including your son." Dawn looked out at Jordan, who seemed unharmed. "It's a good thing I caught them in time," Cynthia continued. "Connor had poured them all shots." "I'm so sorry about this," said Dawn, mortified. "Where is Connor?" Dawn found his nephew in the room across from the master bedroom. Connor was sitting on the bed, facing the window. Dawn closed the door behind him and simply stood there. He was angry with Connor, even though he knew it wasn't the boy's fault. "Why did you do it?" he asked his nephew. "Because I wanted to," came the simple reply. "That's not good enough." "That's too bad." Curse or not, Dawn was pissed. He quickly stepped in front of Connor. "You listen to me. What you did was wrong, and if you do anything like it again, I'm going to send you off to a place where they'll study you like a fucking lab rat. Do you understand me?" Connor didn't reply right away, and Dawn actually saw a flicker of fear on his face. But then Connor said, "Jordan is just like me, you know. Would you send him away too?" Those words from that tiny, innocent voice chilled Dawn to the core. This was not something a child would say. "He's nothing like you." "Keep telling yourself that, Uncle Don. You're like me too, whether you believe it or not." Dawn backed away from him, not knowing what to say. Monica was furious when she got the news later that day. She made Connor go to his room and stay there until she said otherwise. Then she and Dawn proceeded to have an extremely heated argument in the kitchen.
"He put our child in danger, Donovan," she shouted. "We're not prepared to handle a child like Connor, one with his needs."
"He's not a special needs kid," Dawn replied half-heartedly. He was still thinking about what Connor had said about Jordan, and about him.
"Whatever you want to call him, we still aren't qualified. He could have killed those kids."
"Connor's a 5-year-old boy," Dawn found himself saying. "Kids get into things they're not supposed to all the time. He just made a mistake."
"Cynthia told me that liquor cabinet was locked. This was deliberate, Dawn. Something's wrong with that boy. Even though the demon is dead, something is influencing him."
Dawn sighed, defeated. "You're right, honey. But I don't know what to do." Dawn kept the boys at home with him the next day, though he continued work on the manuscript. He even included the liquor incidents in the story. A curious thing happened midway into the manuscript. Dawn introduced an important character without meaning to. The character turned out to be the protagonist's birth father. The father was someone the main character had never met before. But why write him into the story? He reread the introduction and found the new character on a beach in Florida. Dawn thought back to the man he'd seen that one day, weeks ago, watching from the shore while Dawn swam with the kids. Who was that man? Unfortunately, Dawn knew of no one who could answer that question. He didn't want to risk hiring another private investigator after the incident with Ethan. He thought of Cynthia and wondered if she knew any of her sister's secrets. It was a possibility. During Monica's day off, she agreed to watch the boys while Dawn visited his aunt. Monica had been a tad reluctant to take on the task, though Dawn didn't blame her. He promised he wouldn't be gone long. As he drove down that scenic highway to Cynthia's place, he told himself he wouldn't leave without answers. Cynthia had to know something about her sister's boyfriends. Sisters told each other things. He pulled up to his aunt's house and climbed those annoying brick stairs to the front door. She had told him to just come in when he arrived, but before he entered, he glanced across the street to that little cemetery. Zombie Ethan, thankfully, was nowhere to be seen. Cynthia was sitting on the floor in front of her couch, changing the diaper of one of her youngest charges. The baby was no older than 2 and was giggling.
"Who's a stinky baby?"
she asked the boy.
"You are."
She looked up.
"Hey, Dawn, I didn't hear you come in."
He hadn't told his aunt why he wanted to talk to her. He wanted to catch her off guard. He sat on the love seat and waited for her to finish. After returning the baby to the others, who were all napping, she sat on the couch.
"So, what's on your mind?"
Dawn decided to cut to the chase. Was Patrick Scott my biological father? Whatever Cynthia had been expecting him to say, it certainly wasn't that.
"Of course he was your father. Why would you ask that?"
She sounded like she was telling the truth, and it disheartened Dawn. Maybe she didn't know anything. "Aunt Cynthia, Mom and Dad both told me about it, so you don't have to pretend. I know Mom was pregnant with me before she met Patrick." He didn't know that, but a little lie wouldn't hurt. His aunt simply sat there. Had he gone too far? But then she asked,
"Why do you want to know about him?"
Dawn took a moment to process her question. She did know. "Who was he?" he asked with a tremor in his voice. She sighed.
"His name is Stephen."
"Is?" Dawn instantly thought back to the man on the beach.
He's very much alive.
How do you know? Do you keep in touch with him?
I guess you can say that, yes.
Don rubbed his sweaty palms against his lap. Where has he been? She looked about her living room, at her baubles and trinkets.
Well, he died, she said, and then he came back.
Excuse me? Don couldn't have heard correctly. Cynthia looked at him.
He faked his death.
Why?
To hide from something.
Don stared at his aunt in disbelief. Did he tell you what he was hiding from?
No, but it must have been important enough to start a new life.
And you kept in touch with him after his resurrection? She nodded.
He actually contacted me. He wanted to know how you were doing. I was his proxy, I guess you can say. Is that the right word? Proxy?
Don couldn't believe what he was hearing. His birth father was indeed alive. Where is he? He asked.
I don't know if I can tell you that, said Cynthia. I shouldn't have even told you this much.
I have to know. I have to talk to him. My family might be in danger.
What do you mean?
I just need to talk to him. It wasn't a lie. Cynthia bit her lip.
I don't know exactly where he lives. All I know is that he's in Florida.
Dawn sighed with relief. I think I saw him on the beach when we were down there. She tilted her head.
How could you possibly know what he looks like?
Dawn smiled. I just know.
Stephen often worried about you as a kid. I figured there was more to it than just regular parental duty.
Something is wrong with my family. I thought it began with Mom and Ethan, but it seems to have been before that. Mom was infected by a dog.
Like rabies? Cynthia asked.
The worst case of rabies, if that's it. Mom passed it to Ethan, but sometimes I wonder if there's something wrong with me too. He thought about what Connor had said about them being alike. He dared not mention this aloud, though. Cynthia nodded, taking in his words.
And you think you and Ethan passed it to your kids?
Yes.
And how can your dad help with this?
She asked, and Dawn tried to ignore the familial term she used for Stephen.
Can't doctors help?
Doctors can't even detect it. I'd gone to the hospital dozens of times as a kid, and they never found anything wrong with me, or with Ethan. Hell, they didn't even notice anything wrong with Mom.
So this illness that affected my sister, is that what made her go crazy and try to kill Patrick?
If Dad hadn't stopped her, she might have killed us both. Cynthia thought on that, unable to say another word. She clearly missed her sister very much, and Don wished he could undo the harm the curse had inflicted. All he could hope to do now was prevent future tragedy. How did you stay in contact with Stephen? He asked his aunt.
Phone calls. I can definitely tell you he lives in Florida. He told me so a few years ago, when I last spoke to him.
She grabbed Don's shoulder.
Good luck, Donovan. I hope you find what you're looking for.